Hello there guys, this is a video to help all A-level and AS photography students with their photography coursework or exam work, just to give you a few A-star tips that some of my guys have found helpful over the last 10 or so years that will hopefully help you in your studies. In this first slide here, this is just saying the sorts of things that examiners want to see. They want to see a journey of experimentation. They don't want to see you not taking any risks. They want to see you being sort of bold and adventurous in your work and experimenting. As it covers in assessment objective 2, that's if you're taking the AQA, that means that they want to see experimenting with media, with your ideas, with everything from props to lighting, anything. Be a bit more courageous and see what you can achieve. They definitely want to see refinement as well. Don't just do something, leave it. You've got to push it and keep developing it and see how far it can go. At the same time as that, at the same time as refining, you have to show all the time that you are prepared to show your understanding and communicate that understanding through your workbook and also visually. So most of the things that are in this video are to help you achieve that. This next slide is showing several different ideas, just in little blue bubbles there, apart from some of the purple bubbles. They are covered by other videos, but it's mainly the blue ones that I'm going to be talking about in this video. I won't go through every single one, but as you can see here, it's just showing you different ways that you could possibly achieve an A or an A star and ways to get the best marks. I'll just move straight into the next one. Obviously, you can stop the video if you wanted to read what they are. The most important thing, though, for my guys, and I keep saying it time and time again, and that's you must think about ways to be advanced or to be exceptional. Don't just set out to achieve A, B, or C, or a couple of ideas and expect to get those ideas. You have to go off on tangents. You have to be prepared to investigate. Only through you investigating creatively will you then actually come out with ideas that will then lead to other things, whether that's through having accidents, such as the idea just flashing by here. This student's work had difficulty starting in the beginning, but even after initial developments, some of the accidents that happened influenced the development. So just be aware of that. Be open to having accidents. It can be really useful within your work. And look at your workflow, look at your practice. That just means how you work, what you do, the way you do it, because that's the key to you being successful. It's how you work and what you enable yourself to achieve. I showed this slide in a previous video. That just is detailing a really advanced workflow, the two on the left here in particular, these two images, about a student's work who was quite standard in the beginning in the way that it was initiated, but then afterwards more advanced ways were targeted and were developed in that student's work. It's mainly going to be the other examples here that are just in the middle and on the right hand side that I'm going to be talking more about in this video, and they are about definitely making sure you analyze, draw diagrams about your thinking about your understanding, compositional analysis, and also these two other things which are basically all to do with showing your understanding. All of which is, supremely helped if you know and understand what the assessment objectives are. This image here is showing you the breakdown of assessment objectives in the case of the AQA, which is what the exam board that my school works with. It shows the workflow here just on the slide that's going from initial ideas through to research, starting points, through all the way to your final outcomes. And just in the top right there where it details the 5 R's, which is just a way that I get my students to check their books to make sure that if every page they are doing does something to relate, either or refine or review, or it realises something or reveals something about your work. And that's something which you should be checking all the way through your book, and really helps to do either with sort of peers or with your classmates or whatever, just to help you target new areas to develop and also increase the quality of what you've already done. So make sure you think about those assessment objectives, you read the information from the assessment objectives from your exam board in the approach to your work. With your assessment objectives, it is important to know what they are, but don't become so focused on them that it becomes the focus of everything. You just really need to be aware of them, what you need to be doing for them, and the key things that it's asking for in the language. Most of the things that I talk to my students about are involving keywords from those grade boundaries. I tend to focus on the top 3 really, and the top one being about exceptional ability, trying to show that exceptional ability. And if you're always aiming to do the best and aiming to show that, then your marks will more than likely follow. This slide here is just showing the 2 main types of pages you should be looking to get in your workbooks. Make sure you really think about showing the 2. Don't just be showing showcases all the way through. That is where you're showing your best images without any sort of text or information to support it. They're just a visual showcase. At the same time, don't forget to show your evidence pages. You can't have one without the other. You need to be showing how your work relates to your theme, the artist that it connects to, alongside explaining the intentions behind your work. Even within photography, you're supposed to have some element of drawing, whether that's diagrammatic form, whether that's actual drawings of annotations for ideas, but you must have something in there to show and communicate with the examiner that you are capable of designing ideas and coming out with ideas for sets. In the case of this one here, that you can see, this was based around a student's work on animal testing, and they were thinking about using petri dishes, beauty products, as well as things like rabbit's feet, birds' wings, pig's ears, to try and get that idea across. And this was just showing their planning in a really sort of straightforward visual way before the sets then took place. In this next image here, this is from a piece of work from this year from one of my students, where they are using double exposures from natural landscapes and then using those exposures into figures, parts of the figure, as well as then elements such as natural materials and elements, even down to this wooden door here, which is illustrated there in the bottom left. But there's this page of drawings. Doesn't have to be the most amazing drawings ever. It just has to show an ability to communicate. It does help if they are good, however, but if they're not, don't panic. If you have made drawings and you're not fully satisfied with how they look, you could scan them in or photograph the drawings into Photoshop and then fill them with colours, or maybe use a Topaz software to simplify the drawings just to give them a little bit more of an illustrative sort of like flick on the edges of each of the lines that are created. Totally up to you. In this page here, drawings and diagrams have been presented alongside a starting point set just to communicate to the examiner what they were intending to do with those photographs, whether it's something as straightforward as the layers they were going to make together, or whether it's going to be about drawing over, or in this case, because it's quite an odd unit of work, whether they're going to be Vaselining the images because it related to the actual set itself in terms of a material that was being used. In this image here, which is just showing more examples of drawings and diagrams, it's really good that if when you're going back through your book, whether that's when you're checking for the 5 R's or whatever, you find ways of filling space. Sometimes the best way to do that is with little annotations that explain, that show you understanding. If you can include little drawings with it, it helps the visual engagement of the people who are reading your books and trying to understand what you're doing. This one here is just showing how the students' landscape images are then going to be possibly layered into stones that have been dropped into water, which is all relevant to their investigations. This is a slide that I showed to students based on a conversation that I had that was just about how to respond to an artist. Whether that's your planning, whether that's your considerations, you must think about the standard way of doing that, which is normally a recreation of how you'd achieve that artist's work, but also go beyond that. What else could you do? What else could you do with that idea? In this case here, this is showing an example of an artist where they've covered a figure with a quilt. I thought it looked quite like the underside of a mushroom, but that was just me, and I love the mushrooms there. But then on the right hand side there, where it says exceptional, go beyond covering someone in a quilt and wrapping them up. Maybe think what else you could do in relation to your intentions with that quilt. One I suggested was, what about making knots in the quilt and then creating frames to then present your images in? It could be that you quilt the whole figure up and use extra materials to bind them, or you might smooth the cover out. Try and find ways to go beyond the original artist concepts even before you attempt that set. If you include that in the planning, it shows an exceptional ability to think and to understand, and also target ways to develop your work in an exceptional way. One thing that I regularly suggest with my guys is to sit together and post-it note yourself, not physically in real life because that would be quite distressing, but just in the way where you explain what you're doing to a group of people. You then ask for feedback from them, and this slide here is generally what I stick on the board when I'm asking my students to do it, just to give them a little bit to prompt. But don't ever underestimate the power of someone else's ability to give you ideas, because everyone has a totally different framework or a totally different viewpoint than you. It's often very good to get those viewpoints and ideas because they can really help you develop tangents within your work. This next slide, again, just using those key words again about being exceptional, just lifting that from the top mark band there from the assessment objectives. That exceptional quality is needed to be displayed all the time in your work. One of the things I suggest my guys do is start off making a PowerPoint. They drag in a few images that are associated with artist connections, or they might be Google searched images that have something in common with what they're to do. They print it off, and then they hand annotate into those PowerPoints, either showing a drawing of what they could do, or even then showing how their work could be developed. So you've got a mixture of digital images as well as then hand annotated images. These next few images that are going to be going by, these are all to do with finding ways of showing and being exceptional with the way that you present understanding in your work, whether that's through block developments, the way that you use print screens, or the way that you think about presenting work in your workbooks. This first slide here is just about using and utilizing the best images and showing how you can push them even further. At the top there, it just shows you how a portrait image has been mixed with images of glitter to create a artist pastiche image basically. But then the image worked quite well with a number of layer modes before any rubbing took place. So it sometimes really helps just to show the block developments of what those layer modes are. If you then label that and explain that, put it in your book and present it, it just shows, even though it's quite simple for most sort of people involved in photography, an idea of what can be achieved quite simply just with layer modes. This next image here is just showing how print screens can be utilized. They don't have to sort of be too mental, but if you go into PowerPoint, well, you can use a snipping tool and just snip each different stage of what you're doing. It's quite hard within sort of densely packed layered images in Photoshop to show every single different layer. So if you can then break them down into individuals and then label that, it just helps the examiner to understand what's going on. If you then put those print screens into your book, it often really helps to show and communicate to the examiner. You don't have to do it on PowerPoint if you're a hater on PowerPoint, but if you're not, it's great. But if you are, you could always just print them off and again hand annotate right in. That's the sort of thing which can really help. This next slide here, which is showing the figure in like what looks like sort of 3 rays of light going through the head, that's actually from a landscape image from a double exposure series of work by one of my students. They are trying to create mixtures of landscapes and people at the same time in the style of people like Dan Mountford and Emmy Hayes, who are 2 excellent double exposure artists there, or photographers, whatever you want. Now this particular slide here is just showing how they have developed on beyond the first stages of their double exposures, how they've tried to do little bits to refine it or make it just that little bit better, just over than just being a layered image. And this slide here clearly explains how they took elements of the background and then used them over the top a little bit more carefully and with more sophistication than before. And then by the time it's got to the end of the 3 stages, you can clearly see how there's been development from that first one, even though it's more subtle than the actual original image when it was being made up. This next slide here from the same student's work, they've just used PowerPoint here just to show the 3 stages of what this more refined image is. It shows a little artist connection in there as well, which is really, really helpful just to, again, show the examiner the link between yours and theirs, and at the same time, how you've then done it. Clearly label what you're doing when you do this on PowerPoint and use snips and print screens to explain your thinking and explain what you're doing. This is the last example of how a developed image has then been explained and connected to the work and the theme, and then also how artists connect to it as well. And again, dead simple, PowerPoint, copy and paste, stick your text in. But then if you print that off on A4, it's really easy just to straightforward stick that into your book. This slide here, which just using that exceptional word, I'm trying to get that across to students all the time, so they're trying to think about ways of doing it. It's just suggesting the 3 ways of developing that I get my guys to do. Using the 100+ ideas from the student art guide, definitely recommend you get yourself onto that website, guys. It's brilliant for getting ideas. And if you've stuck, look in the 100+ ideas to creatively develop your work. There's got to be something in there for you. The one there in the bottom right, that's about intentional developments. That means something relevant to your intentions. Just going beyond something conventional that shows something that's relevant to your idea, relevant to your theme. And then the blue one there in the top right, that means something conventional. That's straightforward developments. Whether that is, as shown here on this what guide, this is what I get my students to check off to make sure that they've tried something to do with all of these different ways of developing that are quite straightforward and may not have an exact intentional link to the work that you're doing. Whether it's pattern stamps or layered images or thinking about making series or combinations, something along the lines of conventional development is a great way of setting the tone for your work and showing the examiner you're capable digitally before you then look at more intentional or experimental ways of developing your work. This slide here is just showing some examples of conventional developments which were quite useful for this student because they showed off the best elements and the best ways to develop their work without going too far into the experimental side, and you're making and utilizing the best of the one set that they took. This next image here, which is called Crop to Win, this is basically focusing on more tactile elements and ways of developing that aren't just using Photoshop. Think about looking through your book, printing off images and mixing them about and then rephotographing the juxtaposed images that you create. It could lead to some really interesting developments in your work that were more tactile as a base rather than just being photoshopped and digital in their approach. It's really good if you can show different types of experimentation that come from a more tactile starting point, as it will show your ability to experiment in a totally new way. This slide here, which is showing one of my favourite bits of work that was done from AS exam last year, was where the student had printed off versions of portraits that they had taken and then ripped and then tore into just to reveal little openings and apertures, and then photographed the figure then again through those apertures just to create a totally new series of images. Those images were then taken into Photoshop again and used for relayering material, which was really good and showed a really good process of developing. This next slide is just showing the three main last bits I'm going to be putting in this video. One's about compositional analysis, the 5 R's which I've already spoke about, and then the 3 essential sheets which I get all my guys to do. 5 R's itself, this little slide here, which is just zapping by, that's just a slightly bigger version than we might have been able to see before. This is what I print off for my guys to check as they go through the book, whenever they are assessing themselves, peer assessing, etc., as it can help target ways to refine their work and just get every last mark possible. This image here, which just talks about compositional analysis, this is where you could do something fairly straightforward, which is where you could take a starting point or a development image and then just apply that to the rule of thirds or whatever compositional approaches or application you tend to use. I just like the rule of thirds. It's really straightforward. Most people are fairly familiar with it, and it really helps you to analyze your images just in terms of a spatial composition. This page just shows when, after 5 or so sets that you've taken, pick your best image from those sets and just present them on the page. It's great if you can do that with an artist connection just to pull everything together visually, as well as then just giving a few sentences or just a small paragraph just about how that relates to your intentions. It helps if on that same page you put a little summary of what those sets are and how they relate to the theme. Then on the right hand side, I've just shown how you can then target and make different developments from those same images that you presented on that page. This image here is showing 3 sheets that I always get my students to do. They're called the Rationale Sheet, the Content Sheet and the Artist Connection Sheet. It's really good if you do these on A2 in Photoshop and save them, and then you can either print them to A4, then they could go really neatly and easily into your books, or you could print them off on A2 and have them as separate slides to show to the examiner that are outside of the book that just communicate your best examples of work. First page is the contents page, which is just literally a really good way of showing everything that you do to the examiner in a chronological sequence. If you show that with your starting points that you started right from the beginning to the end, it should show that journey of development really successfully just on one image, which is really useful to show the examiner. It's great to take along to interviews as well. This next slide here is just showing what I call a little secret weapon to stick in the front of your portfolios there, and it can be something really useful to show to people who are interviewing you or be used as a conversation starter. It just shows a professional approach as well if you're prepared to think about the interview process before you go into it, if you're thinking of going to college or uni for photography or art-based courses. This next one here is showing an example of a rationale sheet. A rationale is just a way of summarising everything that you do in relation to your intentions. You don't have to call it a rationale sheet or summary sheet or whatever. That's just what I chose to call this one. This is showing what the questions are that I give to my students to prompt them for what to write on the sheet. But it's the sort of thing where it's fairly straightforward. It's just showing what you've done and explaining what you've done in relation to your ideas, how that's changed and what you found out through your investigations. Here is an example of one of those rationale sheets, and this is then showing 3 parts of the work that the students' work is made up of and a little bit of a summary for what that work's about. This one here as well, where there was 2 main parts of the students' work, clearly labelled, a good image to support it, and that's, if the examiner reads that, they'll get a really good summary and account of what that student did. The last sheet here, which is just called the connection sheet, that's where you've got rows then that explain the visual connection between the artists or photographers you studied, your images that you've taken in their style, and then how you've then developed those artist images as you've progressed through the course. The ones there which are called digital montages, they are just mixes of your artist image and your image together, just using opacities or layer modes, just to give a rough idea of the 2 combined together. Sometimes weirdly as well, it can lead to developments in the work without you even realising it, so it's sometimes good just to try anyway. This sheet here is showing 2 examples of the connection sheet done by my students, one for AS and one at A2 level, before it changed to A level this year. But it doesn't matter, any course is any course, and it needs explaining in relation to artists at some point. So it might help to have a look at these examples and see how they've structured their work out. In this last couple of slides here, they're just showing how you can print off your work if you wanted to using Photoshop, and I tend to get mine to either just print it simply to A4 and then put in the work, or split into A2. There is a video somewhere on my channel that shows you how to do it. Just have a little look for that. These last 2 slides here are just 2 really useful little checklists that I give to my guys. One is called just the Have You checklist, which I sometimes give to them if they think they've done their full submission and they have completed everything. I sometimes give them these 2 checklists just to give them things to check off and make sure that their work is doing the best it possibly can. The best one's definitely that 5 hours checklist though. Go through every single page you do and think how you can make it just that little bit more tweaked, that little bit more sophisticated. And it is important in many cases to avoid being cliche. The examiners will have seen so many examples of photography when they've been round to your school or your centre, so it's important that you are avoiding the cliche and just pushing the boundaries a little bit in the best way that you possibly can. I hope this video has have some help to you guys. Any questions, please message me through the channels. Toodles.